Device 2 on page 190 of Satan and his devices against Christians, against people. By engaging them against the people of the Most High, against those that are his jewels, his pleasant portion, and the delight of his eye and the joy of his heart. Thus he drew Pharaoh to engage against the children of Israel, and that was his overthrow, Exodus 14. So he engaged Haman against the Jews, and so brought him to hang upon that gallows that he had made for Mordecai, Esther 7. So he engaged those princes and presidents against Daniel, which was the utter ruin of them and their relations, Daniel 6. So in Revelation 20, verses 7 to 9, and when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and he shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number is as the sand of the sea. And they went up upon the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about in the beloved city, and fire came down from heaven and consumed them. Remedy 1 against this. The first remedy against this device of Satan is solemnly to consider that none have engaged against the saints, but have been ruined by the God of saints. Divine justice hath been too hard for all that have opposed and engaged the saints, as is evident in Saul, Pharaoh, and Haman. He reproved kings for their sakes, saying, touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm, Psalm 105. When men of Balaam, spirits and principles, have been engaged against the saints, how hath the angel of the Lord met them in the way, and jostled their bones against the wall? How hath he broke their backs and necks, and by his drawn sword cut them off in the prime of their days, and in the height of their sins? Ah, what a harvest hath hell had in our days of those who have engaged against the Lamb, and those that are called, chosen, and faithful. Ah, how hath divine justice poured out their blood as water upon the ground? How hath he laid their honor and glory in the dust, who in the pride and madness of their hearts said as Pharaoh, we will pursue, we will overtake, we will divide the spoil. Our lusts shall be satisfied upon them. We will draw our sword, our hand shall destroy them. Exodus 15. In the things wherein they have spoken and done proudly, justice hath been above them. History abounds in nothing more than in instances of this kind. Remedy 2. The second remedy against this device of Satan is to dwell sometime every morning upon the following scriptures, wherein God hath engaged himself to stand by his people and for his people, and to make them victorious over the greatest and wisest of their enemies. Associate yourselves, saith the Lord by the prophet, O ye people, and ye shall be broken in pieces, and give ear, all ye of far countries. Gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, and it shall come to naught. Speak the word, and it shall not stand, for God is with us. Fear not, thou worm Jacob, and ye men of Israel, I will help thee, saith the Lord, and thy Redeemer, O the Holy One of Israel. Behold, I will make thee a new sharp threshing instrument having teeth. Thou shalt thresh the mountains and beat them small, and shall make the hills as chaff. Thou shalt fan them, and the wind shall carry them away, and the whirlwind shall scatter them. And thou shalt rejoice in the Lord, and shalt glory in the Holy One of Israel. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord. Now also many nations are gathered together against thee, that say, let her be defiled, and let her eye look upon Zion. But they know not the thoughts of the Lord, neither understand they his counsel. For he shall gather them as sheaves into the floor. Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion. I will make thy horn iron, and I will make thy hoof brass, and thou shalt beat in pieces many people, and I will consecrate their gain unto the Lord, and their substance unto the Lord of the whole earth. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in that siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces. though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Remedy 3. The third remedy against this device of Satan is to consider that you cannot engage against the saints, but you must engage against God himself by reason of that near and blessed union that is between God and them. You cannot be fighters against the saints, but you will be found in the casting up of the account to be fighters against God himself. And what greater madness than for weakness itself to engage in an almighty strength? The near union that is between the Lord and believers is set forth by that near union that is betwixt a husband and his wife. They two shall be one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. And we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones, said the apostle, Ephesians 5. This near union is set forth by that union that is between the head and the members, which make up one body, and by that union that is betwixt the graft and the stalk, which are made one by incision. The union between the Lord and a believer is so near that you cannot strike a believer, but the Lord is sensible of it and takes it as done to himself. Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Acts 9. And in all their afflictions he was afflicted. Isaiah 63. Ah, souls, whoever engaged against God and prospered, whoever took up the sword against him but perished by it, God can speak you to hell and nod you to hell at pleasure. It is your greatest concernment to lay down your weapons at his feet and to kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the midway. Psalm 2. Remedy 4, the fourth remedy against this device of Satan, is solemnly to consider that you are much engaged to the saints as instruments for the mercies that you do enjoy, and for the preventing and removing of many a judgment that otherwise might have been your ruin before this day. Were it not for the saints' sake, God would quickly make the heavens to be as brass and the earth as iron. God would quickly strip thee of thy robes and glory and set thee upon the dunghill with Job. They are the props that bear the world from falling about thy ears and that keep the iron rod from breaking of thy bones. Therefore he said that he would destroy them. Had not Moses, his chosen, stood before him in the breach to turn away his wrath, lest he should destroy them. Psalm 106. But had not the saints many a time cast themselves into the breach betwixt God's wrath and you? You had been cut off from the land of the living, and he had your portion with those whose names are written in the dust. Many a nation, many a family is surrounded with blessings for the Joseph's sakes that live therein, and are preserved from many calamities and miseries for the Moses, the Daniels, the Noahs, and the Job's sakes that dwell amongst them. That is a sweet word, Proverbs 10. As the whirlwind passeth, so is the wicked no more, but the righteous is an everlasting foundation, or is the foundation of the world. The righteous is the foundation of the world, which but for their sake should soon shatter and fall to ruin. So the psalmist, Psalm 75, the earth and all the inhabitants thereof are dissolved. I bear up the pillars of it, Selah. The emperor Marcus Antonius, being in Almany with his army, was enclosed in a dry country by his enemies, who so stopped all the passages that he and his army were like to perish for want of water. The emperor's lieutenants, seeing him so distressed, told him that he had heard that the Christians could obtain anything of their God by their prayers. Whereupon the emperor, having a legion of Christians in his army, desired them to pray to their God for his and the army's delivery out of that danger, which they presently did, and presently a great thunder fell amongst the enemies, and abundance of water upon the Romans, whereby their thirst was quenched, and the enemies overthrown without any fight. I shall close up this last remedy with those sweet words of the psalmist. In Judah is God known. His name is great in Israel. In Salem also is his tabernacle, and his dwelling place in Zion. There brake he the arrows of the bow, the shield and the sword, and the battle. Selah. Psalm 76. Device against the learned and the wise. Secondly, Satan hath his devices to ensnare and destroy the learned and the wise, and that sometimes by working them to pride themselves in their parts and abilities, and sometimes by drawing them to rest upon their parts and abilities, sometimes by causing them to make light and slight of those that want their parts and abilities, though they excel them in grace and holiness, and sometimes by drawing them to engage their parts and abilities in those ways and things that make against the honor of Christ, the joy of the Spirit, the advancement of the gospel, and the liberty of the saints. Remedy 1. The first remedy against this device of Satan is seriously to consider that you have nothing but what you have received, Christ being as well the fountain of common gifts as of saving grace. What hast thou, saith the apostle, that thou hast not received? And if thou hast received it, why dost thou glory as thou hadst not received it? 1 Corinthians 4:7. There are those that would hammer out their own happiness like the spider climbing up by the thread of her own weaving. Of all the parts and abilities that be in you, you may well say as the young man did of his hatchet, Alas, master, it was but borrowed. Alas, Lord, all I have is but borrowed from that fountain that fills all the vessels in heaven and on earth, and it overflows. My gifts are not so much mine as thine. Of thine own have we offered unto thee, said that princely prophet. 1 Chronicles 29. Remedy 2. The second remedy against this device of Satan is solemnly to consider that men's learning and trusting to their own wits, parts, and abilities have been their utter overthrow and ruin. As you may see in Ahithophel and those presidents and princes that engaged against Daniel, and in the scribes and Pharisees, God loves to confute men in their confidences. He that stands upon his parts and abilities doth but stand upon a quicksand that will certainly fail him. There is nothing in the world that provokes God more to withdraw from the soul than this. And how can the soul stand when his strength is departed from him? Everything that a man leans upon but God will be a dart that will certainly pierce his heart through and through. How many in these days have lost their estates, their friends, their lives, their souls by leaning upon their admired parts and abilities? The saints are described by their leaning upon their beloved. The Lord Jesus, Canticles, I think that's the Song of Solomon 8:5. He that leans upon the bosom of Christ lives the highest, choicest, safest, and sweetest life. Let me repeat that. He that leans upon the bosom of Christ lives the highest, choicest, safest, and sweetest life. The Puritans had a way of saying things back then. Miseries always lie at that man's door that leans upon anything below the precious bosom of Christ. Such a man is most in danger, and this is none of his least plagues. That he thinks himself secure. It is the greatest wisdom in the world to take the wise man's counsel. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not to thine own understanding. Proverbs 3. Remedy 3. The third remedy against this device of Satan is to consider that you do not transcend others more in parts and abilities than they do you in grace and holiness. There may be, and often is, great parts and abilities where there is but little grace, yea, no grace. And there may be, and often is, a great deal of grace where there is but weak parts and abilities. You may be higher than others in gifts of knowledge, of utterance and learning, and those very souls may be higher than you in their communion with God, in their delighting in God, in their dependence upon God, in their affections to God, and in their humble, holy, and unblameable walking before God. Is it folly and madness in a man to make light and slight of another because he is not so rich in lead or iron as he when he is 1,000 times richer in silver and gold, in jewels and in pearls than he? And is it not madness and folly with a witness in those that have greater parts and abilities than others to slight them upon that account, when those very persons that they make light and slight of have 1,000 times more grace than they? And yet, how doth this evil spirit prevail in the world? It was the sad complaint of Augustine in his time. The unlearned, saith he, rise up and take heaven by violence, and we with all our learning are thrust down to hell. It is sad to see how many of the rabbis of these times do make an idol of their parts and abilities. And with what an eye of pride, scorn, and contempt do they look upon those that want their parts, and that do not worship the idol that they have set up in their own hearts. Paul, who was the great doctor of the Gentiles, did wonderfully transcend in all parts and abilities the doctors and rabbis of our times, and yet, how humbly, how tenderly, how sweetly doth he carry himself towards the meanest and the weakest. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. And made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. 1 Corinthians 9. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is offended, and I burn not? Wherefore, if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. 1 Corinthians 8. But how little of this sweet spirit is to be found in the doctors of our age, who look sourly and speak bitterly against those that do not see as they see, nor cannot speak as they speak. Sirs, the Spirit of the Lord, even in despised saints, will be too hard for you, and his appearance in them in these latter days will be so full of spiritual beauty and glory, as that they will darken that you are too apt to count and call your glory. The Spirit of the Lord will not suffer his choicest jewel grace to be always buried under the straw and stubble of parts and gifts. Isaiah 60. Remedy 4. The fourth remedy against this device of Satan is to consider that there is no such way for men to have their gifts and parts blasted and withered, as to pride themselves in them, as to rest upon them, as to make light and slight of those that want them, as to engage them against those persons, ways, and things that Jesus Christ hath set his heart upon. How hath God blasted and withered the parts and abilities of many among us that have once been famous shining lights? How is their sun darkened and their glory clouded? How is the sword of the Lord upon their arm and upon their right eye? How is their arm clean, dried up, and their right eye utterly darkened, as the prophet speaks, Zechariah 11. This is matter of humiliation and lamentation. Many precious discerning saints do see this, and in secret mourn for it, and that they were kindly sensible of God's withdrawing from them, that they may repent, keep humble, and carry it sweetly towards God's jewels, and lean upon only the Lord, and not upon their parts and understanding, that so the Lord may delight to visit them with his grace at such a rate as that their faces may shine more gloriously than ever, and that they may be more serviceable to the honor of Christ and the faith of the saints than formerly they have been. That will take us to page 198. We're getting close here to the conclusion, and it's good to be with you.